All right, welcome everyone to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is configuring warehouse management for light use Dynamics 365 supply chain. My name's Erin and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions in the chat during the presentation, along with the Q&A segment near the end. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Nicole Gump, Senior Program Manager, and Zach Greenvoss, Principal R&D Solution Architect. Nicole, over to you to kick us off.
Thanks, Erin, and welcome everyone. Our topic today might seem like a bit of a departure from some of our typical content that we present around supply chain management, where typically we would be looking at new features that are being released or doing deep dives on configurations or functionality. This topic today is really a step back from that. What we often hear from our customers and our partners is if they don't have complex requirements around warehouse management, they ask, can I still use the warehouse management solution in Dynamics? And of course, the answer is yes, right? But this got us thinking about what is the sentiment and what is the perception in the community around our current warehouse management solution in Dynamics. So we actually sent a survey ahead of this Tech Talk to get some feedback from the community. There was a link to it in the registration for the Tech Talk. We've also been socializing it on some of our LinkedIn posts. And we are also going to put it in the chat here. It's only up to 5 questions, depending on how you respond. It's taking people about an average of 90 seconds to reply. And we're still accepting responses. We're providing that feedback to the product team as well. So I wanted to share a couple of points from the feedback we have already gotten that we thought were interesting. So if you get a chance, still fill it out. But we asked, the very first question, do you feel that warehouse management is difficult to configure? And with the 85 responses we've already gotten, we see that 65% of the people have said yes, they feel that the solution is difficult to configure. And then another question that we asked that I want to point out here is we asked if it were easier to understand how to configure warehouse management, would you be more likely to recommend implementing it, right? So if you are in a position of sales, pre-sales, solution architecture, where you are driving the recommendations and whether or not the warehouse management solution is even in scope, right, for an implementation, would you be more likely to recommend it if it were easier? And this was a 5-point scale, so 1 to 5. So what we found out was that 67% of people who replied gave this question a 4 or a 5. We consider that a high rating. And actually 43% of those 67% actually said the highest mark, which is the 5. So obviously we hear you, right? This is very in line with the sentiment that we just get often, is that we feel like it's difficult to configure. If it were easier, we'd be more likely to recommend it and to not try to work around what we feel is a complex solution. Okay. So, and the final question on the survey was, would you like to learn how to configure warehouse management for this Lite use case? And that brings us to the Tech Talk today. So thank you. I do see some additional survey responses coming in kind of as we're talking. But that's what got us to today's Tech Talk topic. So hopefully you find this information useful. So let's get into the presentation that we have. Okay. If you have been attending some of our recent Dynamics supply chain Tech Talks, we are starting with an energizer. We've got a riddle of the day for you. So I'm going to bring it up here on the screen. Something for you to think on during the presentation, and then we'll give the answer at the end. Okay, so here's the question. Where do werewolves live? Okay, think about that. We'll come back to the answer at the end. Okay, our agenda for the day is that we're going to review some of the business cases for when you might want to use just a light version of the warehouse management solution. I'm going to explain some assumptions I've made and the configurations I'm going to go through. I'm going to spend the majority of this time in a live demo, setting up a site, warehouse locations, all of our kind of minimum viable configurations. And then, as Aaron mentioned, we will have a live Q&A at the end, but Zach will also be moderating the chat throughout. So please do put your questions in there if you have any as we go along. Okay, so let's start with some of our business cases. So I've put a few examples in here. The first one being a retail example. So if we think of a store that has got a back room of stock, they may want to manage that with warehouse management to be able to receive goods into that stock, maybe do some adjustments to their inventory, maybe pick inventory out of there for a scenario like a curbside pickup or an online order fulfillment, something that we saw become more and more common during the pandemic. So this is one use. This is actually the example that I walked through in the demo yesterday. So if you're on both sessions, we're going to do a different scenario today, which is actually going to be this one. So in a distribution scenario, even though we typically think of this one as kind of the standard use case for our warehouse management solution, or what most people think of as advanced warehouse management, there are certainly cases where in distribution, you need a much simpler solution for warehouse management, right? If I've only got a single distribution site, so I don't have this complex network and I've just got a manual facility. So think that, I don't have any automated, conveyor or sortation systems or RFID scanners. I'm just bringing product in. Maybe I'm moving it around and I'm getting it out the door in maybe a sales or a transfer scenario. I don't have any manufacturing in this facility, and my users are really just driving the process, right? I don't need a ton of system logic. Then this is certainly a use case. And like I said, this will be the one we use for today's live demo. And another one that is fairly common as well would be if we switch our focus from distribution to manufacturing. If we're in a manufacturing facility, we may have some simple use cases for warehouse management around the flow of goods. So materials coming in that need to make their way to the production lines, and then also just material going out from production just back into storage. So we're not talking about any complexity here where, we might be in a facility that has manufacturing and distribution, where finished goods, might be in a make to order scenario. So when it comes off the production line, it has to be cross-docked out to an awaiting customer order. None of that complexity would be in play in this scenario. This is a simple kind of material movement in a manufacturing facility. Okay, so certainly I'm sure there are other use cases. These are just some common ones, so hopefully that helps kind of frame the discussion we're going to have today. So So let me go through some assumptions and the configurations as well that we're going to be walking through. These assumptions are related around products, and that's just in the case that if I use a product in a demo today, I want you to know that I've made these assumptions about that product setup because I won't be doing any product setup live. So we have a storage dimension group on the product that would be warehouse management enabled that allows us to transact that item in a WMS enabled warehouse. Along with that, we would have a reservation hierarchy that's been configured and assigned to that release product. The reservation hierarchy will not include any tracking dimensions. So that is the last assumption I've made. Not only are they not in the reservation hierarchy, but they are also not in the tracking dimension groups, right? So we're not using any batch control or serial tracking. That's typically additional kind of complexity that we would consider kind of out of the scope of this light use scenario. Okay, any other assumptions that I've made around configurations? I'm going to point them out in the demo because I am working in a demo environment that's got the Contoso demo data. So anything that was kind of pre-existing that I'm relying on in the course of the demo, I will point out. Okay, so let's talk about what we consider our MVP configurations, are kind of our minimum viable product configurations for warehouse management. They are our core concepts of our distribution hierarchy. That's our site, warehouse, and any locations in the warehouse. They include potentially wave templates, and then also work templates and location directives. And then as well as if we're using an actual mobile hardware device, or if we're just using kind of the desktop version of the mobile app, we have to consider configuring the mobile device menus as well as the actual menu items. So these make up really our core configurations. We have talked about these at a conceptual level in our Introduction to Warehouse Management Tech Talk that we did a while back. It is on our supply chain landing page on the Community Dynamics page, which is where you will also find this recording later on. So I am going to go through those at a very high level, but I don't want to spend too much time here because we want to get into the demo. So again, these slides will look familiar. We have gone over these concepts before, but this is just a quick refresher on these kind of core configurations and why we need them. So like I said, the site, warehouse, and location kind of makes up what we consider our distribution hierarchy. We represent them in a pyramid like this, because they have kind of a one-to-many relationship as we work down the pyramid, but also because we can think of this in a hierarchical way, right? We've got sites at the top. These are generally geographic regions, right? We could say the Southwest United States is a site. The warehouses then are more of a specific location geographically. That might be something like Phoenix, Arizona, within the Southwest United States. But I could have multiple warehouses under that geographical region or that site. Sorry about that. Let me go back to that graphic. And then also, as we move down from the warehouse, we have then our, one or many locations within the specific warehouse that are actually representing, kind of the physical locations where I'm storing or transacting goods in the warehouse. Okay, and then as we move into some of our core configurations for processing, we have, first of all, our wave templates. This one we represent with a funnel to show that when we have demand lines, so we need our wave templates if we are doing transactions that require work to be created. For shipping scenarios, that would be your sales orders, your transfer orders, for production scenarios, you could be doing lean or discrete or process manufacturing that requires work to be created. So those are all what we consider demand lines. The system is going to evaluate those against our other configurations of the work templates in the location directives. And considering all the configurations and query criteria together as part of the wave process, it creates work as an output. And then that is what the user is going to transact. Okay, and then we're going to talk briefly in the next couple of slides about the work templates and the location directives, and then we'll get into our demo. So the work templates are really just the structure of the work. When we are talking about a transaction where we're maybe issuing inventory or bringing inventory in, we have got these pick and put pairs. They have to be in pairs in the structure, or else the work template will tell you that the setup is not valid. I have an example here that shows that you can have multiple pick put pairs in the structure, but I have put asterisks, you see here in kind of the middle section, to show that, especially in the case of this light use of warehouse management, this complexity would not be required, right? In the demo, we're going to stick to a single pick put pair, even for like our outbound transactions. There are other types of work actions. So other than just pick and put, for something like cycle counting, we do have a type called just counting. And so that does not require a pair. But the work templates, conceptually what they are is really just telling the system what is the structure of the work, what is the action that the user is taking as they're completing that work transaction. Okay. And then kind of the partner configuration to that works template is a location directive. At a conceptual level, the location directives represent our business logic. This is a 3-part configuration form. And so what I'm trying to show here is what each of those parts of the form are representing with the configuration. The top part of it is telling us kind of what are we doing, right? Is this a pick directive? Is it a put directive? In what warehouse does this apply? The middle section is telling us how many units and what types of units are we working with. And then at the bottom, the location directive action section tells us where, right? Where do we allocate inventory from? Where are we putting inventory into storage? So it, again, much like our distribution hierarchy, as we work through this, there's a kind of a one-to-many relationship potentially, and that's what this kind of second branch on the right-hand side shows. But again, I've put asterisks over here because we don't need to introduce this kind of one-to-many complexity. You'll see in the demo today, I'm going to stick to just a one-to-one relationship. We're going to keep this very generic so that we can stay kind of within the scope of a light use. Okay. So quick refresher. The last thing I will go through before we jump into the demo is just the quick overview on the mobile structure as well. So here in the graphic, we see we've got a main menu that's available when the user first logs into the mobile app. We've got a couple of sub menus configured, in this case, inbound and inventory. You consider these kind of, the categories of transactions that the user might be doing. And then within those, we actually have the mobile device menu items represented by this kind of yellowish orange color in the graphic. And so in the case of the inbound menu, we might have this transfer menu item that allows the user to receive transfer orders into the warehouse. Same for the inventory one down here. You can see, again, we've got kind of this one-to-many relationship, right, where we might have multiple actions under a certain menu. So for inventory, we could be doing something like cycle counting, or maybe we're just moving inventory around the warehouse. Okay. So let's move in to the fun part of this. So we're going to switch over and do a demo. Let me refresh my session. So as I said, I am in a demo environment with the Contoso data. Yesterday, I was working in the U.S. retail company when we were doing the backroom stock scenario. Today, I'm going to stay in the USMF company since we're doing the kind of single site distribution scenario. Okay, so let's start with our warehouse management module. Let me collapse everything here so that it's easier to follow along. Within the setup, I will point out one thing at the module parameter level. This is kind of an assumption I've made just based on demo data that was already here, but I want to point it out because it's required. So if you're starting with a blank environment, here in the warehouse management parameters, there are two things we want to make sure to fill out. One is this user location profile. This one is required because the user location is used by every work transaction. As something passes through, a pick location, it then intermediately ends up on the user location before it finally is put down to the put location. So for full transactional transparency and tracking, we have to have this user location specified. The other one that is required is this final shipping location type. So again, every transaction that goes out, is an issue transaction. The system is able to identify when to issue that inventory based on when it is put to this final shipping location type. Okay, so those are the two things, user locations and final shipping locations, that we have to specify here. Anything else in these module level parameters, even on all of these additional kind of tabs here on the side, are not required, right? All of those would just be additional parameters that might be introducing some complexity that we're not going to talk about in this light use scenario. So I just wanted to make sure we went through that assumption before we jump into configuration. So let's go setup, and under warehouse is where we will find the first forms that we need to configure, which is our site, warehouse, and locations. That's that distribution hierarchy that we talked about. And you will notice that they are the first three forms under this section. So they are kind of the core configurations, and you'll notice that throughout as we go through the demo today. So let's create a new site. When we create a new site in here, this is just going to be a single distribution facility. I'm just going to name everything with a test so I can go back and find it later. What we need to do at the site level is not much. We really just need to give the site a name because it is representing like a geographic region. We should set a time zone for it. I'm going to leave this defaulted at Pacific time, and then we can add an address as well for our site. So I'm going to pick an address that's, well, of course it's not in there. Let's see what we got. I was looking for one. Let's just go with Bellevue there, and we'll call it 123 Main Street. Okay, so we've got an address. The reason we fill this out is because this address for the site might be used on some documentation, right? Or so we want to make sure that we do give an address to our site, and you'll see for our warehouse as well. Okay. So nothing else needs to be set here. Even under, let me collapse this here. I'll show you the hierarchy is just showing kind of a representation similar to that pyramid that we looked at in the graphic. And then there is a warehouse tab, but I don't need to set anything here. It's not required. The default inventory status can be set at several different places. It does not have to be at the site level. So all I'm going to do is do that time zone and the address, and we're done with our site setup. So I'm going to move from the site down to the warehouse. And what I'm going to create in here is a new warehouse again. Call it test. It's actually going to have the same name as my site, which is allowed. So I'm going to tie it to my site that I just created. And then kind of the most important thing from a warehouse management perspective is that we scroll all the way down in this form to the warehouse tab, and we turn on this parameter for use warehouse management processes. So that's telling the system that, yes, this warehouse is going to use these configurations from the warehouse management module, and we'll be able to transact our WMS-enabled items in this warehouse. Okay, so similarly to what we did on the site, we can create an address here. So this is test. I'll specify that it's the warehouse address. Going to give it another, we'll say it's in a similar area here. Okay, so we now have also got an address listed for our warehouse. Again, this is going to be used, right? This is our delivery address. So if we have vendor shipping us product, this is how they know where to send it. Okay, so important that we do have an address. The other thing that's going to be important is that we set a default receipt location for this warehouse. It's the only other thing I'm going to set on this warehouse. But we do not have a location yet, right? This is a brand new warehouse I just created. So in order to select this, I have to go create some locations. So let's go do that. So my third form under sites warehouses, I have locations now. I'm just going to manually create a couple of new locations here. There are some other ways. We've got a data entity for this. If you've got a long list of locations, you could import them through the data management framework. But again, in interest of keeping this simple and improving, kind of the minimum viable configuration, I'm just going to go ahead and create manually a couple of locations here. So the minimum that we need is really a location that will represent that default receiving location. So I'm just going to call it receiving. The location profile ID, this is kind of another assumption just because we already had some of these configured in the demo data. There is one for receiving already that I'm going to go ahead and use, but I will click on it to show you if you're creating new location profiles from scratch. Really, the important thing with this receiving profile is just that it is license plate controlled. So you want to make sure if you're creating this, that you turn on this parameter for use license plate tracking. And that is just because the inbound transactions, as well as what we'll see here in a second with our outbound location, that it has to have the license plate inventory dimension assigned. So even if you are not tracking any license plates in your inventory, we do need to track them at the receiving dock and at the final shipping location. Okay, but I'm not going to assign a zone or a work policy or anything else that might add complexity to the location setup. Okay, so one other location that is going to be really important is that outbound one that I just mentioned. So let's go ahead and create the bay door location. And again, there is already a profile in here, but similar to receiving, this just has a license plate tracking enabled. So really, I could have one location profile that I just call license plate tracked, right? Because the profile is really just indicating kind of the behavior of the location. So I don't necessarily need to name it, receiving or or bay door. That's what we have location types for, to categorize locations. But this is in the demo data, so this is what I'm using. Okay. One other thing I will set up here in the locations is I'm actually going to use this location setup wizard. It's not something that we see maybe used a lot because people kind of either, manually create locations like I just did, or go the complete opposite end and use the data migration. But this is kind of somewhere in between, right? The system has the ability to kind of mass create locations if your locations are named in a way where they're like sequentially laid out, with aisles or bays or shelf locations. And that is a factor of the location format. This is the only place that location format is used kind of in warehouse management. So I'm going to do I'm just going to show you exactly what I mean. So what you'll want to do is pick the warehouse that you're in. You pick a location profile. There is one in here called no LP, so it doesn't have that license plate tracking parameter on. And this is what I'm going to use. And what I'm going to do, you'll see that once I pick the profile, it's tied to a certain location format. And that format is populated down here. And it tells me I've got, a floor segment that's 2 characters and an aisle segment that's 3 characters. I can put static text in here. I can put FL to represent that it's a floor location. And maybe I just want to create like a couple dozen floor locations, right? Again, think that we're just working in a single distribution facility. It's a manual facility. I've got probably limited square footage. So I don't have a ton of locations, but I want to mass create these 24 locations. I don't want to go through and manually do what I just did for receiving and bay door. So if I say create, you'll see that this says it's been added, right? All of these locations. And if I refresh and I look for just my test warehouse, you'll see that quickly the system created all of my floor locations that I can use for storage now. Okay. All with that same no license plate tracking location profile. So now I've got plenty of locations in my warehouse. I am going to go back to that warehouse setting and set that default receiving location. So in my test warehouse under inventory and warehouse management, I now should have that receiving location to select as the default. So anytime that I register inventory into this warehouse from a purchase order or maybe from a transfer order, it's going to be registered against this default receiving location that we just created. Okay, so now site, warehouse locations are done. Now we can start to think about the other configurations for work templates, location directives, wave templates, as well as the mobile device menus and menu items that support them. So I'm going to go through kind of one scenario each for inbound, inventory, and outbound, which are kind of our main, warehouse management categories. So if we think of an inbound scenario for this single distribution site, we may have purchase orders that are coming in. So we're going to start with our work template. So under setup and work, and there's nothing special necessarily about the order that I'm doing this in. If you wanted to create the location directives first, yeah, you could. I'm just going to go through it in this order because this is the order we talked about them in. So work, and again, you'll see that the very first form is that work templates. So here, all of the work order types that you can do within warehouse management will be listed in this dropdown. It always defaults to sales orders. So if you're working with anything other than sales orders, you want to make sure that you change this before you start creating any new records. So I'm going to switch it to purchase orders. You'll see that there's a lot of stuff in here from the demo data. I'm just going to create a completely new template like we talked about earlier, it's going to tell me it's invalid until I have a pick and a put pair defined, and then it will tell me that my template is valid. So let's call it test PO receiving. So this is our test warehouse PO receiving. And what I need to do is create work template lines. So again, these are those pick and put pairs. So I'm going to start with a pick. And here's another kind of assumption I've made, right? We've already got work classes in the demo data. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick the purchase one. But if I'm going to click on it to show you the setup, it's really just defining the type of work. So nothing complex really with the setup there. It's just related, has to be selected on our work template lines. So you can see I've still got an invalid message, but it's when I get my put here, and I'm gonna, again, I have to select that work class. And now when I refresh, you'll see the system kind of, it reorders the line so that they're in the right order now. And now I've got a valid template that I can use. So that's my work template. That's the structure of my PO receiving work, just a single pick and a put pair. So in order to define kind of the logic behind what's going to happen with the purchase order receipt, we have to go to the location directives. So under setup and location directives, again, the work order type dropdown is going to have all your available types of work and default to sales orders. So we have to switch it if we're working with a different type. So if I switch it back to purchase orders, again, you can see there's a bunch of directives already here in the data. I'm going to create a new one. Here, one thing I want to point out is that even though in the work template, right, we told the system that the structure of the work is a pick and a put, we don't have to define a pick directive for this particular scenario, because if you remember, we set a default receipt location on the warehouse. So the system assumes the picking location is going to be that default receipt location. So therefore, it's kind of redundant, right? You can technically configure a pick directive here. It's not going to stop you, but it's not required, okay? So we're going to call this test PO put, because we only need a put directive. Once the system has assumed we pick it up from that default receipt location, all we need it to do is determine where to put it down. So we're going to say that this directive is just of type put. I'm going to type in my warehouse that will backfill my site. And then what I'm going to do is create a single line here. Like I said, I'm not going to introduce any complexity that's kind of not required. So I'm going to leave this quantity range of the quantity that I'm working with just kind of wide open, right? Anything from 1 to, we're just going to put in a bunch of 9s here. So really any quantity that I'm bringing in can use kind of this record. I'm not going to restrict it by any particular unit. So really anything should be able to use this. And then as I go down to the bottom section, and remember this is 3-part form, this record is going to relate to my single record above. And what I'm going to do is say this, I'm going to call it user directed, and I'm going to tell you why. So basically we've got for a PO receipt, I'm going to allow the user, as they're putting it away into storage, to select the location, right? In this type of a kind of manual, small distribution facility, I don't need the system to go through a lot of complex logic, right? I don't even really need the system to tell the user where to go. The user might know, right? Or they might be able to easily see an empty location. So I'm not going to introduce any system logic here. I'm actually going to type in the word failure. This is a direct way to say that I want that location to be blank when it shows up on the work. That's going to allow the user to just scan whatever location they would like. Okay, that's why I called it user directed. So that is the work template and location directive for purchase orders. And so what we can do is look at the setup under mobile device to make sure we have a menu and menu items that relate to that purchase order receiving. So again, you'll see menus and menu items are the first two forms under this section. If we go to menus first, I'm going to create a new one. And again, this is just the actual menu structure. So we can put on the menu either additional menus, so kind of sub menus, or directly any menu items. This is going to be just kind of my main menu, my root menu of when I log in. So I am going to create another menu underneath of it called receiving. And that way, or maybe we'll call it, we'll give it a better description. It'll be anything that's an inbound operation for this warehouse. And under here, I'm going to go create a menu item that I can then add to this menu. So far, all I did was create a root menu and a sub menu. Before I leave this form, I will go ahead and put the sub menu on this root menu. So you'll see in the available selection, I have both menu items and menus. I'm going to scroll down here on the menu section and put that receiving menu I created under test. So let's go create a menu item that we can actually put on there as well. So what I want from a menu item perspective, so remember, this is actually the action or the workflow that the user is going to execute on the mobile app. So I want a new purchase, receiving, and put away item. So I'm going to call it, let's say, PO, receive, and put. So this is going to be a one-step process, meaning I don't have, two different users in the warehouse where one is on a receiving dock registering the goods and then another user needs to come along and pick up those goods from the dock and put them away, right? We're in this small distribution facility. I likely have that one person who can register the goods and then take them right to the storage location. So we're going to configure it as the one-step process. So again, we'll just call it PO, receive, and put. This is a work operation. We only need to click the use existing work if this was an option where we use the wave templates to create work ahead of the user using the menu item to execute the work. This is actually one where it creates work as part of this process, so we don't need to select this. So in the work creation process, we have a whole list of things here. You'll see that a couple of them are related to purchase orders. So you could choose kind of a one or a two-step process to receive it by purchase order line number or by item. I'll just go ahead and say item. I think that one is a little bit more common. And we do want this receiving and put away. Again, just that one-step process. The only other thing I'm going to set up in here, even though we have a ton of parameters, is this generate license plate. And that's so that the system can create that license plate value that it needs for that default receiving location. If you remember from that location profile, it is license plate tracked. It has to be. So we do want to say generate a license plate value for this purchase order receipt so that the system has it for the transaction. In our case, because we didn't create any license plates for our storage, the user isn't really going to care about this value, right? We aren't going to print a label with the license plate on it. We're not expecting the user to scan it. We don't want to manage that, right? Our inventory kind of management strategy doesn't require that in this type of light use scenario. So we are going to have the system generate it though, because it just needs it for a transactional perspective. So now that I've got a PO receive input menu item, we can go back to the menu and add it to our receiving menu. So again, you'll see menu items here. They display in alphabetical order. So we can scroll down to our PO receive and put, and we can use our arrows to move stuff back and forth. So now that is under our receiving menu, which again, that menu is on our higher level test menu. So what I can actually show you, I'm going to go ahead and move over to my worker setup. I already have a worker in this system, but I want to use it to log into the app to show you this. So under setup and worker, I'm going to find kind of my pre-existing worker that I have. And instead of using the defaults that are in here, I'm going to switch it to this new warehouse and menu that I've created. So when I log in, instead of seeing warehouse 24, I want to see my new test warehouse. And I want the main menu that I see not to be that main menu from the demo data, but actually to be this test menu that I created. Okay, so I'm going to change those defaults. That way, when I log in now to my app, and you should see it here, that what I should see is now the new menus I've created, which I do. You'll see I'm in the test root menu up here. It has the receiving submenu underneath of it. And if I click in there, I've got my menu item or my action to do a PO receive and put away. Okay, so all of that is working, looks good. And again, I guess I'll make a general assumption here, right, that you've got the warehouse management app downloaded and connected to your environment, right, before you're going to set up these menus and menu items. Okay. So I want to quickly go through a couple more things. It's going to be kind of similar to those configurations we just walked through. The inventory example I want to give in this instance for our manual distribution center actually does not require work templates or location directives or wave templates either. We're going to say that the user might just need to do movements of inventory around our warehouse. So if they're moving inventory from one location to another, remember we allowed them to just kind of manually pick the location where the items were stored from the receiving operation. So maybe they find that a location gets too full, or maybe we've, picked inventory from a couple different locations and now we can consolidate. So we're going to allow them to just manually move inventory around. And so actually all they need to do that is a new mobile device menu item. And then we're going to go ahead and put it on a menu as well. So let's start with, let's give ourselves a new menu just to follow the same process we did before. So I don't want to put it under receiving because it's really more of it's a warehouse operation, right? So let's call it, we've already got an inventory menu. Let's call this one warehouse. And this will be inventory operations. So now we've got a new sub menu. We can go ahead and put it under our test menu. Again, I'm going to scroll down here where I see my available menus and I'll put it there. So now I've got receiving and I've got warehouse. I can reorder these if I want to. And let's go create a menu item for movements. There is a way to do movements with some system directed logic that would require you to set up work templates and location directives. But again, in a light use scenario, it is completely fine for us to just have a user directed movement option. So I am actually going to call this user directed movement. And again, this is a work operation. We don't have existing work. And under our work creation process, you'll see the very first one here is movement. And we can generate a license plate here as well. The reason we would want it here, if you think we're moving between two locations in our scenario that do not have license plate control, but if you recall from the very beginning, that user location profile that we had to set up at the module parameter level, it is license plate controlled. Much like our receiving and our bay door location, it always needs a license plate for tracking. So in this type of a movement scenario where we're going from one non-license plate location to another, the transaction still needs a license plate as it passes through your user. So in order to eliminate the user who's completing the movement from having to scan a value, we just turn on this generate license plate parameter, much like we did for the purchase order receiving, and that's going to just allow the system to generate a license plate value based on a number sequence that it needs for the transaction with no impact to the user during the actual workflow. Okay, so that's our movement operation. It's because it's user directed, it's just, the user is going to put in the location where they're moving it from, and then the workflow is just going to ask them what location are they moving it to, right? We haven't introduced any system logic to direct that user to any particular location. So we're really just allowing them to move it where they see fit. Under our warehouse menu we created, I'm going to go ahead and add that move action, the menu item we just created. And I already went ahead and added this to our root menu. So now actually what we should see back here is if we refresh, go back to our menu, we now have the warehouse menu, submenu under our test. And if we click in there, we now have our user directed movement option. So again, it's just asking me to scan a location I'm going to move inventory from, and then it'll ask me where to move it to. Okay. And apologies that we don't have time to actually demo all of these setups. We would probably need an extra hour here to do so. But I do want to get through, I know we're getting close on time. I want to get through the outbound operation as well. So that was our inventory example. So for outbound, in this scenario, we might be shipping orders to customers, but maybe more likely this is just a kind of an overflow warehouse where we transfer inventory out to other sites in the legal entity. So if we're going to do a transfer order, there's one other thing under the warehouse setup that we need to do. So I'm going to go back to the setup under warehouse, and I actually need to create one additional warehouse in here, and I'm going to call it test-t. This is our test transit warehouse. It's under the same site as my test warehouse is, but it is of a different type. So the default type warehouse is just your standard one, but we need to change this to transit. And the reason that we're doing this, again, we're going to enable it for warehouse management, but we're doing this because when we create transfer orders and we ship out the transfers from our site, the goods get stored in this transit warehouse as they are like over the road, right, to account for transit time. So the other thing I want to do, we will need to define a default receipt location at a minimum for our transit warehouse, but then we also need to connect our transit warehouse to our test warehouse. So we just do that by going back to our test warehouse, and at the top general section, you'll see that you can define which transit warehouse is related to this one. So I can find my new one I just created, test-t, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. So quickly, let's go. I'm going to create just one single location in that test transit warehouse for receiving. So it's going to be exactly like our receiving location in our other warehouse. And I am going to use the receiving profile to make sure it's license plate controlled. And then I'm going to go back and assign it to that transit warehouse again. So I know this is a little bit of back and forth, but unfortunately we can't assign the location until we create it. So there's my receiving location. Now I've assigned it as a default for my transit warehouse. That's all that's needed from an additional warehouse setup for transfers. And then we want to go through work templates, location directives, and then I want to introduce that wave template setup because it will be required here. So I'm going to switch from sales orders to when we're doing transfers outbound, they fall under the transfer issue order type. Again, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it test transfer. So this is my test transfer picking. And I'm going to create, again, just a single pick input pair. I've already got a a transfer out work class here that I'm going to use. Again, that's just kind of a classification of the work type. No complexity there. So I've got a work template with a single pick and a put, and I'm going to do a location directive as well for the same transfer issue work type. This one I do need a pick and a put. The system needs to know where to pick the inventory from. If you recall, we've got several different floor locations that we created, so it could be in kind of a number of different pickable locations. I'm going to create, again, a wide open just quantity here. I don't want to restrict it or restrict it by any units. And I'm actually not going to put anything here. I'm going to say pick from any location. And I'm not going to put anything in the query. So the system can pick from any of those floor locations. And then I'm going to create a test TO put. And this will just be the directive that tells the system, once I have picked up that transfer item, I'm going to go ahead and put it to my final shipping location, which is my bay door. So again, we're not restricting by any quantity here. And this is a put to bay door. So once I do this, again, that's the trigger to tell the system you can issue this inventory out. And so at any point before that, it is still actually going to show as on hand in my inventory. I'm using my test warehouse. So let's pick our bay door location. Okay, so now I have got a pick and a put directive for my transfer out. And the other thing that we need is our wave template in this case. So I'm going to go to setup, waves, again, first form, wave templates. And I'm going to create a new one here for our transfer. So we'll call it test transfer. So what we want to do here, we want to pick, again, if we pick our warehouse, it's going to backfill our site there. And the easiest way to automate this in kind of a light use scenario is to select the automate wave creation. So when we release our transfer order to the warehouse, we want it to go ahead and automatically create a wave. We then want it to automatically process that wave instead of somebody having to go manually process it or manage the waves. And then we also want to automatically release that wave. So once it's processed and created work, we don't want that work to be blocked. We're not doing any management there. We just want to go ahead and automatically release it. So it's been auto-created, auto-processed, auto-released. We can just go ahead and do the work right after all of this is done. Everything else is, again, complexity that we don't need. If I save or refresh this form, you'll notice that it has added all of the standard methods that I need. I'm not going to do any replenishment. I'm not going to do any auto containerization. Again, that's kind of advanced warehouse management complexity that we're not looking at here. So we just have the validation of the wave, the creation of the load, the allocation of the wave is the funnel graphic that we looked at earlier that evaluates the demand and looks at the work templates and the location directives to allocate the inventory, and then finally to create work as an output. Okay, so that's the other new kind of configuration that would be related, where we need to create work as an input to our process. So really quickly here, and I know we're running right up against the time, we would have a mobile device menu item. We can call it transfer pick. And in this case, it is work, and we are going to use existing work. And what I would probably do, we could make it user directed, but that would require the user to have either a printed picking list or a label to scan to know the work ID. I'm actually going to make it system directed so that the user can just log in and the system will present them with any open work. Again, I'm going to generate a license plate because my inventory is stored in locations that doesn't have this value, but it's going to be needed when I get to that bay door put location. So I'm just going to have the system generate it, and I'm going to limit this. It has a similar, there must be a similarly named menu item in there, so it wouldn't let me save that record. Sorry about that. I'm going to limit it to that work class that we used on the work template. So that's transfer out. That way it's only used for transfer picking. Okay. There would be a mobile device menu we could create and put that menu item on. In the sake of time to wrap up here, I know we're right at the top of the hour. I want to go back to the slide deck. Zach, we have time for maybe one question. Is there anything you want to bring up here?
No, I think we're good, Nicole.
Okay. Thanks so much. And thanks for moderating the chat throughout. I will not leave you hanging any longer. Our riddle was, where do werewolves live? The answer is in a warehouse. Funny joke for you on this Thursday. So thank you for joining. I know we ran right up against the time. As always, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm going to turn it back over to Erin to wrap us up.
Excellent. Thanks, Nicole. I've posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We would love to get your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. We, again, thank you for your participation and taking that for us. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within about 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to Nicole and Zach, and of course to the audience for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you may be.